Hey everybody, Tony G, the director of MusicLegacyInternational.com. Here today, our guest is Grayce McCormick. She's the owner of Lightfinder PR, and we're going to find out a lot about her business and her qualifications and the great work that she does in the industry. Hi Grayce, how are you?
Hi Tony, thanks for having me. I'm doing well today.
You are an owner of Lightfinder?
I am the founder of Lightfinder PR, Lightfinder Public Relations, for the last
great.
11 years, going on to my 12th year.
Beautiful, beautiful.
And it's not cheaper by the dozen, it's more expensive each year, so anyway.
Yeah, that's for sure. Everything is, right? So
Yes.
basically, in Music Legacy, we have all levels of people in music, arts, and entertainment. So what I always like to start off with is how you got started, what sparked your interest in what you do to put your heart and soul into your business.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you for asking. I probably can, I'm going to take us from the Midwest to the East Coast, then back to the West Coast and circling around here. So I lived in New York for many, many years. I was living on Long Island, actually was my last spot in New York City, but I moved to New York after college, back when Koch was still in office. So I'm aging myself a little bit. So end of the 80s, 89. And I was in the dental field at the time, and I was working on, for one of the dentists of the stars, working on people's smiles, like the Paulina Porskovas of the world, and all the rock stars, Doc McGee, who managed Bon Jovi and Motley Crue and all those guys, and they would come in to get their teeth fixed. I got married fairly young and had my children young, and I want to say I kind of did the reverse in terms of business. I was doing philanthropic work on the East Coast between New York and Boston, raising a family, and then my former spouse took a position with his company that took us out to Arizona. And then shortly thereafter, I left the marriage and thought, what am I going to do as I'm raising my kids as a single parent? And how does that fit into my skill sets and the fact that I stayed home for a minute to raise my kids when they were young?
Yeah.
So I took a position as director of sales and marketing for a high-end fitness center in North Scottsdale, where I was living at the time. And then I bought advertising on ESPN radio. And I said to the producer at ESPN Phoenix, well, who's going to voice this? He said, well, a man or a woman. I said, well, that's cool. I said, I wrote the copy for the ad. And I said, well, could I voice it? I've done some acting in the past in theater in New York and commercials on the West Coast. And he said, yeah, come on down to the studio. I like your voice. So we did it in one take, and he brought me on board to do some voiceovers for ESPN, which led me to have an interest in radio. Nice. And I wound up, this is, you think back 20, 25 years ago, we didn't have much in terms of social media. And I pitched myself, which I do every day now in PR, but I pitched myself to an AM radio show called Your Insurance Matters. They were looking for someone to market the show with potential for on air, which was my ultimate goal. And so I took the job, was getting paid, marketing the show. Right away, I was on the air covering the insurance scam of the week. and it was fascinating. I was learning on the job about radio production and booking and all the things. The program director at that station liked my work, and he said to me, you're kind of smart. Sometimes you're funny. I mean, he was trying to be funny, but not.
Yeah.
And he said, think of something for my show you're not getting paid. And I created a relationship show that I took all the way to Howard Stern's Miserable Men show. And so I did that segment, this relationship segment on AM, eventually FM, and then Sirius XM radio. And in all of that, this was like the first 5 years post building a career, starting to build my career. People were like, a lot of people, maybe you want to read this script and maybe produce this project, maybe in Hollywood. And I was having Santa Monica dreams. I was having LA dreams at the time, having lived in New York, which I still love. But I wound up starting a music management company, and I did it, cold, blind. I got a book on how, everything you always needed to know about the music business, but were afraid to ask.
Yeah.
And I think that book is still out there today, and I don't know how many editions it's been, but I took on a band out of Texas called Flawless Escape, and then I started adding bands to my repertoire and learning as I went. Because in all of it, there was some, angle of promotions and publicity as a manager. Looking back, had I gone into a CAA or a Nashville even management company, I might have learned a lot more quickly and less painfully.
Right.
I was, so here I am doing radio, moved to LA. I'm pitching film projects, taking meetings with some of the heads of CAA, who I still have relationships with today, one of the co-chairs. I pitched Kevin a feature film that I wanted Julia Roberts in. I mean, I think back on this and just the fearlessness that I had. I really enjoyed the bands I was repping, and I was building relationships with people like Warren Hort, of course, as I think that's how we connected. Tony, who brought up the Fray, and Shakira and James Blunt and Colby Calais. And Warren at the time co-owned Swing House with Phil. And, even in one of my bands getting, When in Rome, I don't know if you remember the song The Promised, but When in Rome was at Virgin, they were a one-hit wonder band from the 80s, if you will. They were signed with Virgin in 87, I believe. And the band broke up over musical differences like many bands. But that song, The Promise, still remains to this day one of the top 100 hits of all times, dance hits. And I was introduced to their new lead singer, who was not the two guys that sang vocals on When in Rome's original album, but their synth and keyboard player owned the band technically in the States and was approached by an agent in LA to re-up the band, if you will, and tour with them. The Missing Persons and Gene Loves Jezebel and Bow Wow Wow and Flock of Seagulls. So anyway, I brought my band When in Rome 2 to Warren to finish this album that they had co-written. And I got them signed to a label. I got the album funded. I watched Victor and Drizzo retrack an entire album in like 4.5 hours, and it was insane. And,
wow.
Yeah, it was nuts. And it was cool. I was meeting the most wonderful people in the business, and especially being a woman in the music industry on the management side, it's still unusual. I'm sure, Tony, you may have seen the Billy Joel doc that's out, the 2-part documentary, and even watching Billy Joel's first wife and how powerful and intelligent she is and remains, and how she learned as she went managing her husband's career. Yeah. What does that take? What savvy does it take to survive in the arts and entertainment? So long story long, I like to say.
And that's what makes you stand out, is that power. Not so much the power, but the undying striving for the goal.
Yes, it's passion, it's creativity, it's strategy, and it's strategy, and believing in the folks that you're working with, whether it's in the music business or whether it's in the arts or or even an author. I've probably repped. Well, I digress. That was how I segued into music and into producing, and then I did a little leave of LA in 2013. I went off to the middle of nowhere, Iowa, to a meditation community. The town's called Fairfield, and the meditation community was set up by the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who was the guru to the Beatles. And if you remember back in the day when they wrote the White Album, and they were in Rishikesh, India, with this guru and Mia Farrow and her sister Prudence, and they wrote all these songs about, like, please come out to play, dear Prudence.
Yeah.
So I wound up working for the organization for 2 years. I was the director of media and public relations for Maharishi Foundation US, which is Transcendental Meditation, which is the technique that the Maharishi rebranded and brought to the US. So there's Transcendental Meditation centers all around the country. And I handled that on the media and PR level, as well as the university's first year David Lynch Masters in Film, which became an MFA and is now a screenwriting program, and their Sustainable Masters. So I was like a homing pigeon between two organizations under the same infographic that didn't always hold hands. And the David Lynch Foundation is kind of all part of their infographic, separate and distinct, but still part of their infographic. So I worked with David. I did PR when I started my PR agency for a music video for David Lynch. I learned and grew so much in those few years of working with these folks. And frankly, the technique of TM is, universal. It's beautiful. A lot of celebs, including Howard Stern. I know the person that gave him his mantra and his mother, and so many different people practice transcendental meditation. I then decided to start my own agency. So I started Lightfinder PR in 2014 in the fall, and I've represented, my very first client is a luxury retailer called Overland. My second client is a manufacturing company that applies water jet technology to architecture and design. I've been heavily arts, entertainment, nonprofits, veterans work, and I've also repped, again, 40 authors, 40 different titles, not just in terms of the earned media or the PR side to a book, but also getting them, an agent, a literary agent, or securing a publishing deal. And all of these things take time, effort, strategy, and then the connections, which is what PR is. And I still will say today, PR, even though it's earned media is what PR is, it is personal relationships. And how do we cultivate that and grow that? And it's all tied into the creative process, which is what your company does, Tony.
Right. It's perseverance. It takes a lot of perseverance, right?
It does,
Yeah. So now, are you able to talk about any projects that you're working on now? Or your plans for the future?
Yeah, my plans for the future are to continue on doing what I'm doing and supporting, again, heavily arts and entertainment and music. I'm currently working with some folks. I can't really say who I work with because it's proprietary, but I can also share, something really tied into the music industry, which may be of interest to you.
Sure.
I took on a conservation client in 2019, and the client was called World Tree. And they approached me through one of their investors, and they're an eco-investment company that plants the fastest growing hardwood tree in the world. It's an Asian empress tree. President Carter, dear late President Carter, happened to have 20 acres of these trees, and he didn't know what to do with the wood. So his dear friend and neighbor, Jill Stuckey, who had been running the Forest Service in Plains, Georgia, reached out to this company, and they paid him about $100,000 for the wood. They harvested the wood, and they also had a luthier from Bon Iver come in, grab some of the wood, ship it off to craftspeople friends to make a collection of instruments from the wood from Carter's plantation.
Wow.
They reached out to me in the spring of 2019, and they wanted me to book the most famous country musician I could in 1 month for expenses only to come play at this fancy barn dance birthday party that they were partnered with the Carter Center on. And it was going to be in Plains. And I said, well, I'm not a booking agent, I'm a publicist, but I do have high-level relationships. I saw the opportunity and I agreed to see what I could do in a month. So I called Kevin at CAA, one of the co-chairmen, and I said, perhaps CAA could sponsor this or get behind it. And 20 minutes later, I was on the phone with Jeff Gregg, who used to be pretty much their head music agent in Nashville. He still lives in Nashville, but he's in politics now. And Jeff's like, send me your wish list. We secured Tim McGraw, and I say we, in 1 month to come play 3 songs for expenses only. And they were touring at that time. And my client was like, we didn't think you could do it. I said, well, I wasn't sure I could do it myself, but it takes a village. It takes a village in anything we do. And especially in the creative process. So they kept me on, and I was able to bring on Rita Wilson and Christian Bush. He's half of Sugarland. She, of course, is Tom Hanks' wife. And they were touring together at the time. And then they brought me as their publicist. At the end of the year, I got them some decent earned media in a short period of time. But also, we were not able to have the party at the end of 2019 for the president, because both he and Mrs. Carter had some pretty bad falls that year that were in the news, black eyes and whatnot. So the following year is 2020, and I was just working on this music collection then with their head of marketing. That was kind of my primary goal, was branding that out. And by the spring, we had COVID and no one could even tour. So my client was trying to regroup. What could we do with this music collection that was being made out in the netherworld? And I said, well, a couple things. Why don't we get on a call with the VP of the Recording Academy and Winnie, who runs development for Music Cares for 30 years, I think, or 35 years. And I know Winnie Wynn really well. And they brought on the Grammy Museum head, because I thought if we could get the collection, this music collection made from the wood from Carter's plantation into the Grammy Museum would add value to the collection and be a great opportunity for storytelling. So that was in process. And then I was asked to plan out, basically produce his 96th birthday party on the talent side virtually. So I was able to go back to Rita
perfect.
and Christian. And then Dickie Betts participated. Of course, he's since passed, from the Allman Brothers. And Stephen Stills and Ben Montek, and Jeff Slade. I don't know if you know Jeff. He's in New York. He's a musician. The marketing head brought on the Indigo Girls and Jake Shimabukura. I got Eddie Vedder. It was beautiful. And that was delivered to the president for his 96th. So that was a really just to kind of showcase, public relations also isn't always the earned media or the interviews that I get for clients. It's the relationship building. It's the outreach to management and PR teams for artists, and thinking of different ways to create exposure for any brand. And it's joyful. I still love what I do. While I still run my PR and marketing agency, I'm also producing limited series and film projects. And one of the projects that's very close to my heart is based on the book The Last Fighter Pilot by Don Brown. Don is retired JAG. He's running for Senate, I believe, in North Carolina. He owns a law practice still today, but he discovered my late client who flew the final mission of World War II. And his wingman was the last veteran killed in action in World War II, and the granduncle of Scarlett Johansson. So Jerry Yellen was my client. Phil Schlomberg was Jerry's wingman who died in that final mission of the war. And Scarlett's granduncle. So she did 2 PSAs with us over the years. But we are now producing Don and Brian Frankish, who executive produced Field of Dreams and The Fugitive, etc. Brian's an iconic producer, and he's DGA, PGA. Started his career, he's 81. He started his career 60 years ago as a line producer in Hollywood. So we're producing a limited series based on the book, The Last Fighter Pilot. And that has been in process. It looks like we're getting closer to packaging to present to the streamers, basically, to see where we can get this lifted off, because it is a beautiful story about love and reconciliation. Jerry dropped bombs on the Japanese in a time of great anti-Semitism. We're seeing a lot of similarities in today's political culture. I'm not trying to get political. I'm just sharing a little bit of the story. And it's fascinating that he wound up having a son who currently still lives in Japan, one of Jerry's sons, and married a Japanese woman. I'll try to be brief, but when Jerry's son went to study abroad in the late 70s in Japan, he came home to his dad, who quote unquote hated Japanese because he dropped bombs on Japan, and he was trained to do that as a pilot. And Jerry had learned transcendental meditation. He'd been going through a lot of healing. And then when his son went to study abroad, he came back to Jerry and said, "Dad, I'm in love with this Japanese girl. I want to marry her." And Jerry said, he was not happy. He said, just what did her father do during World War II? And he said, he was a kamikaze pilot who survived, which is odd. That's not, how kamikaze pilots normally don't survive. So Jerry basically said, if her family gives her blessing, it's your life, and I want you to be happy. So his son Robert went with his beloved and her brothers to the parents to ask permission for their sister to marry this American. And the mother's crying, and there's lots of screaming and emotion going on. And you said you'd never let our children marry an American, those kind of things. And finally, the father looked at Robert, Jerry's son, and said, "What did your father do, if anything, during World War II?" And he said he dropped bombs on Japan. And the father sat there with all the emotion going on around him, and shortly thereafter said, "I give permission for the marriage, because any man that's brave enough to drop bombs on Japan and survive, I want the blood of that man running through the veins of my grandchildren." And so Jerry wrote a book at the time called Of War and Weddings, which has been remade into a book called Jerry's Last Mission, or it's been republished under a different title. And there's also a documentary out there called Jerry's Last Mission. So I highly recommend, if anybody wants to read The Last Fighter Pilot and Jerry's Last Mission, they'll get an idea of what what we're up to with the last fighter pilot.
Thank you. And what's your next steps?
So my next steps will be continuing to run my business, and it's beautiful because I can work from anywhere, and I get out to New York here and there because two of my 3 adult children are now living and working in Manhattan, not in the Manhattan. 2 of my 3 children are working in the city, so
okay.
So I get out there, and I just again I'm mostly work on a referral basis, or people just find me online or on Instagram.
Well, next time you're in New York, let's talk, and then we'll go for coffee or lunch or whatever.
I would love to. I'll be there in November, so definitely would love to.
Nice.
Any way I can support what you've created and the musicians and the artists as well, I'm happy to.
Excellent, excellent. All right, good. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Music Legacy International.